I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. This is the latest in the Democracy Docket series of events leading up to the 2024 general election. And it has been an informative and great series so far. Please make sure, if you have not, you can watch all of these events on Democracy Docket's YouTube channel. So I encourage you to do that. I also want to make sure people know that if you have not already signed up for Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters, you can do that by going to democracydocket.com and clicking on the subscribe button. If you want to get premium content, you can join and become a paying member. And right now, Democracy Docket is offering a pre-election discount special, $20 off the annual membership fee. So it's $100 between now and Election Day. So take advantage of that. We have an absolutely great lineup tonight. I am, as you can tell, waiting. We're now over 600, so let's go ahead and kick this off. And we have really an absolutely star-studded, in many respects, panel today. Eva Longoria, who really needs no introduction. She has worked for 20 plus years in Hollywood, both in front and behind the camera. She has recently made her directorial debut in 2023 for the film Flamin' Hot. And she is just an amazing actor, an amazing director, but also just an amazing person and someone who is a committed philanthropist and activist. She does not hide from using her platform to further good. And it's something I talk all the time about, is that everybody has a platform that they can use, and she uses hers. She has spoken out about issues like immigration, reproductive rights, and for purposes of tonight, most importantly, the issue of democracy. She is a hero and a champion. So thank you, Eva Longoria, for joining us today. I also want to introduce Stacey Abrams, who is literally one of my personal heroes and inspirations. People who ask why I do what I do, I usually offer them two names. One is Reverend Barber, the other is Stacey Abrams. And she is one of the most eloquent and most important voices of our generation on the issue involving voting rights, not just in her state of Georgia, where she has transformed that state. And literally, there are not many people you can say has transformed an entire state, but she has transformed the state of Georgia when it comes to voter participation and voting rights. She has launched multiple nonprofits dedicated to promoting democracy, voting rights, and effective public policy. She transformed also the Democratic Party when she was the minority leader in the Georgia House of Representatives, and was the first Black woman to become the gubernatorial nominee of a major party in the United States. But those introductions, frankly, understate the importance that these two women have meant to democracy in the United States. We are going to be joined in a little bit by María Teresa Kumar, who, as all of you know, is the founding president and CEO of Voto Latino, the largest Latino voter registration and advocacy organization in the country. It has registered more than 600 new voters and she was named by Fast Company as one of the most creative minds in global business, and by Elle as one of the 10 most influential women in Washington. If only she was here to hear this wonderful introduction I just gave her, but I'm going to, with this, kick it off to Eva Longoria, the one and only, who's going to lead us through this evening.
Yes, well, I get the privilege of asking the questions that everybody has to you both and María Teresa when she comes on. I don't think I could survive without the Democracy Docket's newsletters. They're filled with so much hope because there's so many victories, Marc, but they're also, they're delivered sometimes with anxiety when you tell me there's a new lawsuit filed, and I'm like, but then I know it's in your hands, so then I feel better. But I'm so grateful to be here, and especially with Stacey, who's also my hero, and all the work that she's done in Georgia. But I'm going to ask some questions that I think are, burning questions that we all have, and especially because this will be the most litigated election in U.S. history. I think with over 250 election and voting lawsuits filed this cycle. Marc, you played a really big role in fighting back in court. And again, if you're part of the newsletter, you get the updates. But can you just tell us and everyone what cases we should be paying attention to leading up to the election? And just so all the folks know, we're going to be talking post-election stuff as well. But leading up to the election, what do we still need to be paying attention to? What hasn't been resolved?
Yeah, so look, the Republican Party and their conservative allies have made a deliberate choice in the last 3 to 4 months, really since, frankly, the time that Kamala Harris became the nominee of the Democratic Party, to attack the voting systems around the country. So we have seen an unprecedented wave of right-wing litigation that is aimed at making it harder to vote, aimed at purging voters, making it easier to challenge voters. I wish I were not saying this in the presence of Stacey Abrams, but there is no state that has led the charge against challenging voters than the state of Georgia, as you can speak eloquently to. But, we have seen the Republicans under, Donald Trump's leadership and instigation say they're not interested in turning out voters. They're not interested in getting people to vote. They're interested in making the voting laws harder and spreading disinformation and misinformation through the court system. So we have seen them demonize, in particular, the non-existent problem of non-citizen voting in the United States. They have now invented this problem out of thin air, and they are suing all over the country, bringing litigation they know they will lose. And this is a critical point. They know they will lose these cases because they know they are frivolous cases, but they are purposely wanting to bring these cases and lose them so that they can build out a grievance structure to say that somehow they were wronged in these cases that they are litigating over a made-up problem involving non-citizen voting. They are also demonizing all manner of mail-in voting and early voting. We continue to see them attack the mail-in voting system from state to state to state. Just earlier today, they went to the U.S. Supreme Court because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court had the audacity to say that if someone made a small technical error in their mail-in ballot and they caught it, they should be allowed to vote a provisional ballot on election day and have that vote counted. That is, in their view, unacceptable. So we're watching this from state to state, but the message that I want people to realize is that the fact that the Republicans are filing these lawsuits doesn't mean they're winning. In fact, they're losing these lawsuits at a record number, and they can't let people. No one should get dissuaded from voting, believing that these efforts are going to be successful.
Well, who's funding that? Who funds litigation you're going to lose?
It's a great question. I mean, there was an article recently in one of the major newspapers that talked about the fact that there is hundreds of millions of dollars on the other side that is funding this sort of litigation effort, this web of right-wing organizations. And look, Donald Trump has said this is what he wants. Donald Trump has said to the RNC, don't spend money on getting out the vote. Don't spend money on registering voters. Just spend money on this. So I think if you want to know who's funding it, you can start with the RNC, and then you can look at the groups of donors who are responding to Donald Trump's, pleas to set up a structure that will allow him to claim falsely that he was wrongly deprived the outcome of the 2024 election.
Yeah. Well, it's so easy to be discouraged by so much voter suppression. And I think especially in Georgia, Stacey, and you have done such incredible work in that state during, your time in this legislature, and just as a voting rights activist, all the nonprofits you've set up for democracy and for voting rights. And so it's really not an exaggeration to say that you really paved the way for Georgia to flip blue in 2020, and we elected the 2 Democratic senators. So my question to you, I guess, is when Governor Kemp signed the SB 202 into law, it caused a national uproar. What's the status of that voter suppression law, and what impact is it going to have right now in this election?
So I want to tie it back to the last question you had for Marc and then bring it forward to Georgia. So the reason they file lawsuits they know they're going to lose is the grievance structure that Marc laid out But it's also a very successful tactic because they're not just thinking about this election. They're thinking about all the elections they stand to lose if the electorate continues to evolve. And that's what we face here in Georgia. When I became minority leader back in 2010, it was because I stood for the job because I could tell that the demography of Georgia was changing. And demography is not destiny, it is opportunity. Our responsibility was then to figure out how do you harness it. And one of the best ways to harness it is to make sure everyone who is eligible to vote has the ability to do so. Well, my opponent in that effort from the moment I started was Brian Kemp. And as much as he was lionized in 2020 for not committing treason, which is basically what he did, he did nothing that 49 other governors didn't also do. He just was on tape about it. He has been the single most effective architect of voter suppression in this country because he creates voter suppression infrastructure and then he shops it out. And so then you see, Ron DeSantis putting his twist on it, or Greg Abbott, or Frank LaRose, but it starts with Brian Kemp, and it's because their intention is not to just win an election, it is to completely either collapse a system or manufacture a system that disenfranchises millions of voters that they find inconvenient. And we know this is true because he said it. So in 2020, when Democrats flipped the state, in 2022, in a debate, Brian Kemp said, we changed the rules. We created SB 202 because we didn't like the outcome. Not because there was fraud, not because there was a problem, not because there was lack of security. He didn't like the outcome. And the only thing he couldn't like about the outcome was who voted. And so SB 202 has, if you watch Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm, we know you can't give water and food. But the more insidious provisions are the ones that we're now confronting. Everyone celebrated recently when there was the announcement of how many people voted early in Georgia. I'm like, oh my God, and the Republicans trotted out, oh, this proves there was no voter suppression. No, what they did was they made it harder to access drop boxes. They made it more difficult for vote by mail to work by adding these unnecessary ID rules. They basically shortened the amount of time you had to apply for a ballot and return the ballot. They made it so hard that thousands of voters who used vote by mail in 2020 shifted to in-person early voting and got into really long lines. And so what we know SB 202 serves as, it's a predicate for how they can continue to weaken the infrastructure of democracy because they don't want certain communities to vote. This isn't Jim Crow era, let's stop an entire race of voters. This is let's stop the marginal voters who can make us lose elections. And you file suit after suit after suit. You break the infrastructure of democracy and the voting rules because you want to dissuade voters from showing up. You want to make it difficult if they do show up to actually get their ballots counted. And you want to lay the groundwork for how you further restrict. And so the last thing I'll say is, and we'll talk about this later, I think, the state election board rules that we are fighting about this year got started with SB 202. The mass voter challenge is giving individuals the right to question the legitimacy of voters, to go to the county and say, here's a list of 500 people I don't think should get to vote. They get this letter in the mail saying, come prove that you have the right to vote. It is, I've got to give plaudits to Marc Elias because we give him a lot of work to do. And he has been incredibly successful. But SB 202 has been effective in that it has forced behavior changes. It has reduced, for some, their willingness to engage because they're simply exhausted by the effectiveness of voter suppression. Our work on the other side, I'm sorry, Eva, you're on mute. Sorry.
I wanted to ask you that. Is that strategy working?
Yes.
If their whole strategy is to just make it more difficult, why wouldn't we be enraged and go the other way as opposed to like, well, this is just too hard?
Well, one of the reasons we do the work we do, one of the reasons Marc's work is so important is they need to know people are fighting for them. That's why we have Fair Fight and the other organizations we've created. That's why Marc Elias's work is so important. There is an internalization of responsibility that most people have. former presidents notwithstanding, most people, when something goes wrong, we think, what did I do? And so if you show up to vote and someone says, well, you can't vote because you didn't turn this piece of paper in, or you're being challenged, you don't think who's attacking me, you think, what did I do wrong? And that's why the Republicans have been so aggressive about trying to create these false narratives that there is no voter suppression, that it is easy to vote and hard to cheat. No, it was never easy to cheat. What they want to do is make it a personal failure of yours if there's a mistake, if there's a problem. Because when you feel like it's your fault, you stay home. When you feel like someone's taken something from you, you show up and you fight. Our job is to remind people that it is not you, it is them. It is their fault, and we've got to push back.
Yeah. So Marc, you agree that all of these lawsuits that you've been fighting, they've been, even though they've lost the lawsuit, they've still been effective.
Yeah, I think that the Republicans try to get three things out of it. Number one, if they can win one here or there, like, they're happy, right? The second is that, as I said, they want to create a grievance structure around that gives Donald Trump the excuse for when he loses. The third is that, and I'm curious about Stacey's reaction to this, is that the legal system is kind of not set up to deal with the clear pattern of abuse that we are seeing from the Republicans. You know, judges write opinions, and by their very nature, it's kind of like, well, side A says one thing, side B says nothing, B says something different. And, you know, on balance, I side with side B, right? So the problem is that when Republicans file 5 lawsuits that say, you know, there's non-citizen voting, even though all 5 get dismissed, the courts have in some sense created unwittingly a legitimacy around it, because people think, well, all right, well, there was enough of a dispute that a judge had a rule on it, right? And so, you know, Stacey mentions the challenges, and, you know, to her point about Brian Kemp, I mean, this is a state that saw 364,000 voters challenged in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And a rational governor, a rational legislature would have said, man, we have a big problem. Like, 360,000 people is the largest mass challenge in America at that point in American history since the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Act. I mean, you know, like, you'd think Governor Kemp would have been like, we need to end this. Instead, what did they do? They made it easier to challenge. They made it harder to dismiss challenges. And then when challenges were still getting dismissed, they passed another law to make it easier to challenge, harder to dismiss challenges. So I do worry that there is this kind of sense that the Republicans are tapping into, that they can create a sense of danger or uncertainty. And it's our job to tell everyone listening, and I hope everyone listening hears this from me and from Stacey and from Eva, like, it's nonsense. Like, don't be intimidated. Don't, like, you did nothing wrong. You know, you got to vote. You got to have a plan to vote. You got to vote. And there'll be plenty of lawyers and others who will take care and protect you.
Yeah.
Go,
Stacey,
the only other piece, there are 3 phases to voter suppression. Can you register and stay on the rolls? That's why they've made mass challenges easier. That's why they've made it harder to register. If you're in Texas, you have to, if you're a registrar, you've got to register to be a registrar in every single county. I had Ari Berman on my podcast, Assembly Required, and when he walked through what you have to do in Texas now, it is extraordinary. Then, so it's, can you register and stay on the rolls? Can you cast a ballot? That's what Marc has been fighting on in every one of these states, especially in Arizona and in Nevada, where they are trying to stop you from actually being able to cast your ballot by saying there's something improper about your approach to being a citizen. And then the last one, and this is what he was referencing about Pennsylvania and the Supreme Court, is does that ballot get counted? Let's say you jump through every hoop. Does the ballot get counted? And Georgia this year tried to add an extra layer to it with the state election board trying to delay that ability. Yeah. But what we've got to remember, and what Marc is absolutely right about, and what this community has to shout from the rafters, voter suppression isn't one thing. It's any of these things, because when the state acts to interfere with the right to participate in democracy, that is voter suppression, full stop, they can't do it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a lot of the work that, a lot of the orgs are doing. And I know Maria will talk about it, Maria Teresa is the voting plan, right? That there's a voting plan. Am I registered? Do I know where I'm going? Do I have the right identification? You know, I might have to go, it might have changed from the last time. Like there are many, many obstacles. I was just reading some of the questions, and everybody wants to know post-election. A lot of people want to know, okay, this is all fine and dandy. You're going to keep fighting anything that pops up before November 5th. But, you know, a lot of us are nervous and have anxiety about, you know, what happens. He's already said, you know, CNN, everybody's already announced that he will be announcing he won no matter what the night of the election. So all these networks are the media's trying to say, guys, please don't call the election just because he's going to go say an acceptance speech does not mean he won. But just that chaos, like, let's go make this chaotic, and that he will challenge it. Even if he does lose, he's going to challenge us. And so, you know, Marc, you're the lead recount lawyer for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. And I think in 2020, and you led, you know, this fight in 2020 against Trump's post-election litigation. And so, what are you doing to prepare for the post-election, and what are you going to expect from Trump?
Yeah. So first of all, on the last question, what to expect from Trump? Trump lies about everything, right? I mean, Donald Trump is a congenital liar, and he is constantly lying, and he lies about elections, and he will lie about the 2024 election. I mean, he has since, you know, if you go back and look at 2020, he claimed that he won 6 states that he didn't win. Okay. Those were the 6 states where there was litigation in the immediate aftermath. Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Okay. Those are the 6 states that he claimed he won that he lost. What's he done since then? Well, since then, he has claimed he won Minnesota, a state he lost by 7 points. He more recently said he won New Jersey, which he didn't. He said that if the ballots were accurately counted in California, he would have won. And he has said now that he's going to win New York. Okay. I think some journalist needs to actually ask Donald Trump, what state do you admit you did lose? Because Donald Trump is incapable of telling the truth about the outcome of the elections. And in 2024, he will, as sure as I sit here, say that he won before he knows that he's going to say he won before a single ballot is counted. And that will be the reality. And it is the job of the mainstream media to not give him that platform. Don't cover him when he says it, you know, because it's just a lie. Whether they do or they don't, we shall see. But I think what all of us need to realize is that just as he filed litigation in 2020 and lost, whatever he plans to do in 2024, he will lose again. You know, the fact is that at the end of the day, Donald Trump can claim whatever he wants, but it doesn't make up for the fact that he doesn't have the votes. I want to add my voice to something that Stacey said, because it is one of my, and I'm glad to see you have a co-host, Eva. This is good. This is good.
He helped me with my ballot.
That's wonderful. I want to echo something Stacey said, which is that I'm thrilled that Brad Ratzenberger and Governor Kemp decided on January 2nd, after the votes had already been transmitted to Congress, after the electors were met. I'm glad they decided at that point that they would not try to do the thing that was actually impossible to do, which was to find votes that did exist. So kudos to them for that. But the fact is, that's Donald Trump's strategy, right? Donald Trump's strategy is to find things that don't exist. It is to try to corrupt a process that honestly he is not going to be in a position to do. So people should, you know, have patience in the post-election. They should realize that the ballots are not going to get counted all on election night, that it's going to take a few days as it did in 2020, and that's okay. That's part of a normal, healthy democracy, and that they should have confidence that those will be counted. And if they do the things that I know you're going to talk to Maria Teresa about, and that you've been eloquent about, and Stacey's been eloquent about, they make a plan to vote, they vote. The lawyers will take care of making sure the votes count and that the election's certified. The voters need to do their part, and I think everything will be fine.
Yeah. And then Stacey, with the you know, election rules changing in Georgia specifically, are you nervous about the impact that they will have post-election in Georgia, how they're counted, how they're certified?
So we've got these amazing lawyers who brought suit, and Judge McBurney, and this goes to Mark's point about just filing multiple suits. So Democrats filed suit, Republicans then filed similar but not identical suits, and then Democratic suits basically made their way, and Judge McBurney said, yeah, this is you're chaos agents, and we're not going to suborn it. The Republicans who had sued then appealed his ruling, saying, we agree, you can't do it, because they didn't think it would work quite that well. Luckily, the Georgia Appeals Court and the Georgia Supreme Court, they didn't rule against it. What they said is, we will not accelerate the process. And in Georgia, it takes a long time to get the Supreme Court to hear something. They don't have time for the rules to take effect before the election. So what I want people to understand is that for this election, the rules are not in effect. That does not mean those rules have been invalidated. And again, I know we have to be myopically focused on Trump as an avatar of chaos and evil and wrong.
Yeah.
But this is part of a larger strategy that does not disappear. It existed before him. It will exist after him, because the issue is not the candidate, it's the voters. They don't like our voters. And so, yes, the rules, I'm not concerned about these rules in particular, although because of SB 202, we have rules about which absentee ballots to consider. We have provisional ballot rules that prior to this would have allowed you, and this last one good example, in 2020, if you voted provisionally, if you decided you were going to brave the pandemic and go to vote and you showed up at the wrong precinct, they would have allowed you to cast a provisional ballot, meaning you filled out your ballot, and then as long as you came back, they would count your ballot. Well, now, because too many people took advantage of it, and if you've ever been in Atlanta traffic, you can understand why going to the wrong precinct could mean it's 2 days before you can get to the right one. They changed the rules. If you vote at the wrong precinct before 5 p.m., you cannot cast a provisional ballot. You have to make your way to your actual precinct, which sounds innocuous until you realize you've had precinct closures, you've had movement. People can't get there. We don't have the most robust and successful mass transit throughout the state, throughout the region. Second thing, now that is harder. It is harder for someone whose shift works and has this brief moment of time. So they've made it harder for lots of different things to happen post casting your ballot. So as much as the attention focused on the state election board, SB 202 and SB 189, the two voter suppression laws that Brian Kemp architected and put in place, are going to make it hard, which is why the work we're doing to put out good information, to make people make a plan to vote, to file those suits is so critical.
Yeah, and obviously these laws disproportionately affect communities of color.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is worth pointing out is, in the 2020, after the 2020 primary in Georgia, my law firm sued the state of Georgia and over long lines. And this is what they found, is that if you were in a precinct, this is the 6 metro counties of Atlanta, okay? If you were in 6 metro counties of Atlanta and you were in a precinct that was 90% or more registered voters were Black, you waited online an average of 51 minutes. If you were in the same six counties, same, should be the same equipment, should be the same resources, and you were in a precinct that was 90% or more white, you waited in line an average of 6 minutes. 6 minutes versus 51 minutes. Now you understand why they banned food and water in line, because the white people aren't waiting in line. There's not enough time for them to have water or food. And you understand why they changed the law that Stacey just said about sending someone to another precinct, because that person who is now going to another precinct, it's not like they have to just brave the traffic. They just waited in line. I mean, like, they just waited in line for 51 minutes. And now they're being told, go someplace else. And I always say this to people when I talk to, rooms of well-off individuals, I'm saying, how long would you wait in line to vote? You're expecting these folks, to wait in one line and then drive and go another line, and so it is a very, very calculated, in my view, set of targeted provisions, because otherwise, why would you change that law? Like, why would you make it so that someone, I mean, it's not like the state of Georgia doesn't have electronic communications to know that you voted in this polling location rather than that polling location. The only reason you change that is because you're trying to inconvenience and disenfranchise voters.
Yeah. Well, but it's so obvious. This is what I don't understand. I think a lot of the questions in the chat are, how, how can these lawyers be punished or you've said some judges have done that, like don't your chaos agents don't even start, but not all judges are like that. But like, how can they get away with the obvious agenda and this strategy that is wasting time and creating fear? How does that system continue?
It begins with the vitiation of the Voting Rights Act with Shelby v. Holder. The states that are doing this are permitted to do this because they are no longer held accountable. And so one of the lawsuits that we didn't win, despite trying hard, was to push Georgia back under the umbrella of the Voting Rights Act. When the election of 2018 happened, when we could prove the long lines, the disproportionate rejection of voters of color, the very uneven treatment of absentee ballots, when all of that was clearly evident and the judge said this is wrong, what he also said is, because of Shelby v. Holder, because of Common Cause, because of Bronovich, because of these Supreme Court decisions, you are no longer protected as a citizen from discrimination in voting. And so part of the problem, and one of the reasons what Marc does is so remarkable, is that he finds the ways around what has become a fairly static system that does not protect voters of color anymore. It's hard to win. And therefore they pass these laws because they know there's a very low likelihood that it will get overturned. And if it does, it will be beyond that election. And so they don't worry. But they also know that it creates a conversation in community. If you know that your friend tried to vote and they stood in line for 51 minutes and got to the front and had to get in the car they don't have, and thus had to wait on a bus to get across town to get to the other precinct, that becomes the narrative throughout the community of how hard it was to vote. And so the next election, I'm not doing that. I'm not showing up. And neither are any of the people I told that story to.
And along the same lines, we heard Trump yesterday in New York talk about this secret he has with Mike Johnson, and how people are assuming the Speaker of the House can prevent the certification in the event that Kamala wins. So, Marc, do you want to walk us through why that's not going to happen?
Yeah. So first of all, look, Mike Johnson is an early adopter of election denialism. I mean, Mike Johnson, before he was Speaker, in December of 2020, during the post-election, when he was just a backbenching, member of Congress from Louisiana, he led the effort to corral the Republican members of the House to support Donald Trump's efforts to throw out the election results in 4 states. Okay. He is a true believer in this cause of election denialism, in the widespread disenfranchisement of voters. This is something that is in Mike Johnson's core. It is also the case that Mike Johnson has a very tenuous hold on his conference. He was elected by a very narrow margin, and he really hasn't been able to effectively govern since then. So he is willing to do whatever it is Donald Trump wants him to do, both because he believes it, right? He is a true believer, but also because he thinks it's the only path to hold power. So here's the deal. Mike Johnson's not going to succeed. Donald Trump and Mike Johnson are not going to succeed for 3 reasons. Number one, because come January 3rd, when the new Congress is sworn in, Hakeem Jeffries is going to be the Speaker of the House. So Mike Johnson's not going to be in a position to do anything because he won't be the Speaker. In fact, he may not even be the Republican leader at that point. So I have a lot of confidence that Democrats are going to retake the House, and that'll solve that, number one. Number two, let's not forget, in 2020, Donald Trump was in the White House as the president. Mike Pence was presiding over the joint session. And that won't be the case, obviously, this time. You have Joe Biden, who is as committed to democracy as anyone. And third, Congress has since passed a new law, the Electoral Count Reform Act, that really puts significant limitations and guardrails around what it is that Congress can do to mess around or muck around with the results. Once the election results are certified and the electors meet and they vote, there's really very, very little that Congress can do to change that outcome. absent absolutely extraordinary circumstances, which would require Democratic and Democratic concurrence. So I have a lot of confidence that that Mike Johnson and Donald Trump are winking and nodding to each other for their base, but not because they're actually going to be able to do anything. And I am thrilled to see Maria Teresa has joined us. So Eva, I don't know if she's ready yet and positioned.
I am ready. I'm in a car. My apologies, but the work never ends.
The work never ends.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Maria Teresa. We're so
How are you?
Happy you could join us. We've been having a great conversation about obviously the November 5th. But I think the most recent headline for Latino voters, has been the rally yesterday, in which the rally called Puerto Rico an island of shit. I mean, by the way, amongst other things, the watermelon comment, so many things came out of this rally yesterday, but it has really fired up the Latinos. In I think probably the biggest way so far in this election, because we know that the Latino vote is not a given for any party in any election. It's always up for grabs. What is Voto Latino doing to help make sure that Latino voices are heard?
So first of all, Eva, you have been such a champion of our work, and I'm so grateful for everything that you've done. And Marc, the reason that we have access to the ballot box in Arizona, in Nevada, in Texas, and North Carolina was because you represented us in so many of those lawsuits. So incredibly grateful to be here tonight. I have to share with you what happened yesterday at Madison Square Garden. Not only was it reprehensible, but it was dangerous. And one of the things, Eva, that we did immediately was that we reached out to Unidos, Mi Familia Vota. We reached out to Hispanic Federation, and all four of us, the largest organizations for voter registration in the Latino community, we went out and we put out a statement. I can tell you that the statement has reached almost 1 million impressions. Tomorrow night, we have a conversation with Janet, myself, and the President of the United States to talk about the importance of early voting. We have a formal partnership right now with Telemundo. Tomorrow is National Early Voting Day. That's what we're going to be doing. If anybody on this call wants to join us, we are on over 200 college campuses. We have 60 partners around the country, and we are going to text bank 1 million voters in key battleground states. I think, Eva, this is the moment for us as the Latino community and our allies to stand up strong, to recognize that the fact that Cheney and OAC can be part of Kamala's tent means that democracy is absolutely on the ballot. And we have to come out for our country. And we also have to stand strong for the Latino community. And this idea that the Latino community is vacillating back and forth, what we have found is more that they're receiving a lot of disinformation. So a lot of them are considering staying home. So we need to make sure that we leave it all on the mat in the last 8 days, that we door knock, that we talk to our friends, and that we uplift each other, and making sure that we are talking to each other in very honest and frank ways.
Well, there's many election deniers, especially in the border states with large Latino populations like Arizona, Texas. They have made unfounded claims that non-citizens are voting, and which is illegal. Do you expect to see this rhetoric post-election? And what can we do about this disinformation?
I'm glad you're bringing it up, because everything that the rally pointed to yesterday, when Trump talks about this idea of the enemy from within, when he talks and tries to claim that there are undocumented people voting, it's because he's specifically talking about brown Americans. And he is setting the stage for that our vote all of a sudden becomes less than that of any other American. And so let's be very clear. We need to make sure that not only do people register and vote, but that they vote early and that they bank the vote. That way, it actually reduces the idea of any violence at the polls. It also speaks very plainly that we deeply believe in the patriotism of the vote from the Latino community. If you were to ask me why he's trying to connect this, is because he knows that without the Latino vote, he cannot. He only he basically, that's the only way he wins, is if our vote is directly suppressed. And so we have to be very clear when we talk to the media that they should have headlines on this idea of what he's saying when he's trying to dehumanize us and he's trying to other us, because it's all connected to the power of the Latino vote in these really key battleground states.
Yeah. And Stacey, we've talked about this a lot. We actually did this in 2024, Ossoff and Warnock, of this Black and brown unity that we don't, we cannot get it together enough, like strong enough, because I really feel, we have similar issues and challenges, right? Our
100%.
communities. And so, Stacey, what do you see as far as the Black and brown voters and becoming advocates and working together?
So it works and it happens. So I'll give you 3 quick examples. So in Georgia, in 2018, when I ran, and Maria Teresa was incredibly helpful, as were you, Eva, we tripled Latino turnout. We tripled AAPI turnout. We increased Black participation by 40%. And we did it by talking to everyone and linking and uniting our issues, recognizing we were separate voting cohorts who all had identical, or at least we had common needs. We kept that in place. And that's why in 2020, those numbers stayed high. In 2022, it weakened a bit. And some of that was because of the voter suppression laws that passed. And people forget these laws passed in 21. And so they started to have an effect. And it also helped to fracture the bonds because there was a conversation about who was being targeted and who wasn't. So one of the things we have to do is we have to work together. That's why I have a PAC that's working in Nevada, in Arizona, in North Carolina, in Georgia. We are funding Unidos. We're funding the Gente. We're also funding the Native American votes, because that's a voting population, especially in Nevada and Arizona, that is small but mighty. And those voters, if they are precluded from voting, and Marc has done extraordinary work fighting for their rights to vote. But we've got to remember that they don't like the fact that these are the voters that are changing the margin. If you go back to the very beginning of this conversation, this is not about the laws. It's not about the name on the ballot. And they want us to be so myopically focused on Trump. We ignore they were doing this before him, and they will do it after him. It's not about him, although he is the best way to get what they want. It's about the fact that they don't like the voters who are showing up, who they were used to being quiet. And so you're absolutely right. We have to be not only in unity with one another, we don't have to be identical, and we don't have to do it for the same reasons, but I'm only successful if every Black person in Georgia voted. The people I want to win would still lose. We have to have the Latino vote. We have to have the AAPI vote, which is why I launched canvases this weekend for both of those communities, because we have to be intentional. It is not us versus them. This is our country, and we have the right to be as engaged, as aggressive, and as patriotic, and that patriotism is in our vote.
Yeah. Well, I would love all of y'all to say some closing thoughts and words of encouragement, because that was the point of talking to y'all. So I don't know, Marc, do you want to start with some closing statements, and if you could loop in a little bit of like, how do we prevent another January 6th if this doesn't go his way and the big tantrum happens and it's another January 6th?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to preemptively just thank the 3 of you for joining this event, because, part of the way we prevent another January 6th, part of the way we ensure that everyone can vote and everyone does vote, is by doing events like this. It is by speaking out. And at the beginning, I mentioned, why I find your courage in speaking out so inspiring. Because the fact is that all of us, everyone watching this, everyone on this panel, everyone in the country has a town square that they can take to, and they can speak out against authoritarianism. They can speak out against voter suppression, against racism, against the xenophobia that we saw and the fascism we have seen in Madison Square Garden and elsewhere. Everyone has that, and the problem is when people don't use it. When they feel like they don't want to step into something that might, cause their uncle to look at them askance, or at their local diner, someone thinks, well, they're a Harris supporter, and I don't like Harris supporters. It is all of our obligation right now, when democracy is at stake, when you have a force that is trying to demonize large segments of society, it is everyone's obligation to stand up in their town square and say, this is not okay. It is not okay what we heard. It is not okay for citizens of the United States, that citizens of Puerto Rico who are citizens of the United States, to be subjected to what they were subjected to. It is not okay for the kind of xenophobia and racism and hate to be spewed every day. And all of us need to stand up and speak out in favor of that. We need to stand up and speak out in favor of the right to vote, and that every lawful ballot is counted, and that accurate results are certified. And if we all do that, if we all are willing to step forward, then I think we're going to be okay. Because ultimately, and this goes to something Stacey said that I think is really powerful, in many respects, these lawsuits that I'm involved in, we're buying time for democracy. We're not solving the problem. We're sort of solving it for the next 8 days or for the next 80 days. The way we're going to solve it for the long run is frankly by more people being like the three of you, who are willing to go be out there in the public eye and be willing to say that we need a more inclusive and more perfect democracy than the one we've had before. And that includes electing candidates who share our values, but it also means respecting the right to vote and ensuring that they're accurate elections. And if everyone does that and everyone votes, I promise them, the lawyers, we will take care of the rest. We'll make sure that the ballots are tallied, and that, it may not, that Donald Trump will do his nonsense, but he tried that in 2020 and he lost. And he'll try it in 2024 and again, and he'll lose again.
Maria Teresa, you want to give us some words?
So one of the things, Eva, that you and I have always talked about was the possibility of the Latino vote, and the fact that young Latinos really hold the power of this country in our hands is not small. We worked so closely with Stacey back in Georgia, not only in 2020, but during the senatorial special elections. And it was because it was the growing Latino community. And this is a fun fact, right? If you look at Georgia, Latinos are 4% of the electoral base, but they're 20% of the classrooms. These are young people that are aging into the electorate in places like Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, even in Arkansas. And so if you ask, why is it now, this moment in time, people are clashing with our democracy? It's because the strength of our multicultural America is what keeps bringing us through. And it's going to happen again. And for folks tomorrow, if you have time, like I said, we kick it off with the president tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Voto Latino Zoom. And then we seamlessly go in and we start phone banking 1 million voters. Join us, because it's going to be what you deeply believe in, Stacey, what you deeply believe in, and Marc, what you will keep saying. It's going to take all of us to put on our superhero cape and get to work.
I know, and especially if anybody speaks Spanish, the amount of
Please.
disinformation in Spanish, we need the Spanish speakers to help as well. Thanks, Maria Teresa.
Thank you.
Stacey, you want to bring it home?
Well, I want to begin by saying thank you to you for moderating this conversation and for the work that you do. Thank you to Maria Teresa for always being at the forefront and lifting up the possibility. Thank you, Marc, for fighting. I know we owe you a big check from the state of Georgia, because we keep you employed. Make sure you've got something to do every Thursday, no matter what. But the reason we do this, the reason we're all in this call, and I want to thank everyone who's listening and everyone who's going to watch this on replay. There are 3 things we've got to do. One, we have to verify that we have a plan to vote. And there was a question in the comment about banking votes. What that means is assume something can go wrong and get it done now. Across the country, we have the ability to bank our votes. I know there's worry, I know there's concern, but we have more ability to do more when we've done the thing we need to do. So bank your vote, so verify. Second is volunteer. Show up tomorrow, Maria Teresa. Go on to Democracy Docket and look at the resources they have. Go to fairfight.com, but find some way to volunteer. We've got 8 days to fix what we have and to hold what we've earned. So do that work. But in addition to the formal volunteering, find 5 people that you don't talk to, not the ones who are all on this call with you, but the 5 people you know are kind of waffly, not about who they would vote for, but if they're going to vote. And do not lecture them. They will not be lectured into better behavior. Ask them what they're afraid of. Ask them what they need, and then connect the dots with them, but also invite them. It may not work every time. Voting is not magic. Voting is medicine. And there are real ills in this country. And the other side has told us plainly they have no interest in solving them. And if they don't want to vote for themselves because they don't trust the process or the system, ask them to vote for someone who doesn't have the right to do so, the ability to do so, who has to live with whatever happens. So verify, volunteer, and then by God, make sure we vote, because we are on a path to victory. This can happen. I live in a state that was never supposed to be in this conversation. And we're here because we built multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational coalitions, and because we ignored everyone who told us it could not be done. And we were in lawsuits up until the end. And even though I didn't get the prize, we made the progress, and that's what matters. We can do this. And if we get this work done, if we remember why we show up every single time, we can not only stave off, the demise of our democracy for another generation, we can actually build the democracy we deserve. And that democracy is waiting for us. So let's go get it done.
Wonderful.
Well, I want to thank Eva Longoria, Stacey Abrams, Maria Teresa Kumar for being here. Thank you on behalf of Democracy Docket. Thank you on behalf of the audience for everything that you do, and for being a part of tonight's event. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Here.
Thank you. Bye-bye.